Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to Just Thinking. It's hard to believe, but another 3 months have gone by, and it is now time for our quarterly report with Representative James Arena-DeRosa. Hi, James. How are you?
Mary, doing okay. Thanks so much for having me back.
Absolutely. You find it goes by quickly, the
It
3
does.
months?
It flies by.
When did this happen? But at any rate, I know there's a lot on tap, and we're going to start with the state budget, the impacts of all of the nonsense in the federal government, and what's that doing to us, at the state level.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's quite a challenge, and we'll talk about the snapshot and where we are at this point in time, but it's likely that by the time this airs, there'll be 5 more things that Trump and Musk do that we'll be scrambling to figure out. I do think that although we don't know all the impacts, we certainly know how much the federal government contributes to our budget, and it's kind of $15 billion, which is, there's no way that the state can cover and sustain that. So, I mean, do you want me to get into some specifics that we're concerned about? Or?
I want to ask you one question about that $15 billion.
Sure.
I mean, the days of revenue sharing have gone,
right,
which is, just sending us a check. So all of these dollars are attached to projects, specific projects.
Well, programs, that's right.
Right. This isn't free cash that you get to
that is correct.
Use as you want to. So is this mostly, does it fall into any one category?
No, a lot of it does around the health, and you're right, it's for specific things. And the question is, well, what are projects that we can live without if we have to just postpone them or not do them until we can find the money or get federal support? But then others are going to have huge impacts. And I mean, there's kind of 2 categories. There's the general stuff that I worry about aviation safety and just, health and other things, regulations, what's going on. But in terms of Massachusetts, Governor Healey's projecting that 2 million people will lose their health coverage if, in fact, the Medicaid cuts that the Republicans are considering go through, $880 billion. We're holding our breath on that one. It's going to affect so many states in so many different ways. I mean, I can't imagine that the cuts will be that severe. But if they are, I mean, that's a considerable hit to real lives, real people, things going on today. Not, geez, we're not going to be able to get funding to do the bridge on the Cape or whatever, which is unfortunate. That's because we're so far behind on infrastructure.
Right.
But those things you can stretch out a little. I think it's the day-to-day things. We're also, I've always been very concerned about food security, and they think that the SNAP rolls, the used to be called food stamps are going to be cut significantly at a time when food security is rising. We in Massachusetts need to do a little better when we get to legislation. I'm going to talk about something that I've got in play because that's federal dollars we're leaving on the table. And I'm hopeful that those programs will sustain those, will still be there. But it's who knows? And I don't know if we want to get into the detail of how they're going about this, but it's very troubling. Yeah, go ahead.
My big thing is that, okay, so 2 million people would be affected by the change in the Medicaid.
Yep.
Okay, so the only options are let's understand, Medicaid is mass health.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So for people who just think, oh, well, I've never gotten Medicaid. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that mass health is Medicaid.
And we cover 3 times the poverty rate, which is substantial working and middle class. It's got a broad reach in Massachusetts. 2 out of 7 people in Massachusetts are on that program. So that's a huge hit.
And the ones that are the most likely to get hit are the ones who are at the slightly higher levels of income, if I'm thinking correctly.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to do it, if it's a means-tested kind of thing. And
maybe, although they were also worried that they may just block grant it and say, look, we're just going to cut it by X dollars. You've got this much money to work with. You go figure out how to do it out, which is another whole.
But okay, let's say that even if they did do it as a block grant and you had to figure out where you were going to spend your money, the likelihood is you're going to focus on the people who have the least.
That's true. Probably the people who need it most.
So we're really once again whittling away at those people who are the working, lower income folks who are trying their best.
Get squeezed in the middle.
They're just constantly squeezed.
And sometimes the way the federal and state rules work, I've always said this, it should always be a better deal to work, but in some instances it's not.
Yeah.
Because of the cliff effect and you lose benefit. That's not good, and that's a longer term thing that both federal and state needs to work at. It should always be better. The Pope talks about the dignity of work and the importance of contributing to your community if you can. The interesting thing about SNAP is most of the people that are on SNAP are either elderly or children or disabled, so it's not, they think there's this huge savings out there that people are sort of taking
waste,
advantage.
fraud, and abuse. Yeah.
Oh, well, so statistically, over time, the biggest fraud that's been found is in defense contracting. We haven't heard much about that. Meanwhile, they're cutting $40,000 veterans from the Veterans Administration, all in one fell swoop, which is not, we try to help our local veterans agents as best we can if they've got someone who's trying to navigate the system. I just think that that's not a good approach to do it. And, it's interesting. Well, I really want to talk about two things. One is, you were there, Jim McGovern was there on Saturday. So appreciated that he came to listen, spent hours listening constituents.
Jim McGovern being our congressman in Washington.
He's our member of Congress, and a lot of it was people just concerned and frustration about losing certain things or what's going to happen. A little bit of frustration of the only time I hear from Democrats is asking for money. So, it's kind of an interesting to hear some of that stuff. I was like, yeah, I hear you, same thing. But good for him that he did that. Yeah. And I am hearing that the Republican National Committee, I know this isn't partisan, but it's just observation, they are advising their Republican senators and members of Congress to not have town halls, to not meet with their constituents, to not have coffees. I think it's disrespectful. I think it's unpatriotic. I think it's un-American. That's our system.
That's what you're paid for.
No kidding. You represent. And it's interesting, Mary. I want to talk just a little. I, as best I can, try to meet with people and have office hours, and we post them and get together with people. And during the gun bill last year, some of my colleagues like, well, I'm not meeting with those gun people. I'm like, wait, they're your constituents. I will meet with everybody. And I supported the bill, but there were some responsible owners like, James, can we talk about this and this and this? I had several meetings. And why do I meet with people? One, out of basic respect for my constituents, right? Second, I learned something. Every time you talk to somebody, you learn something, right? And then third, guess what? Maybe I'm like, oh, that's a very reasonable approach, and that's what we did with the gun. I went to the chair, and we actually changed some things that I thought were reasonable that weren't going to compromise public safety. Sportsmen and hunters and things that they want. I'm like, okay, we can do that. That's, to me, how our system works. And I think it's shameful that they're not meeting with people because they should hear. Look, if you believe in what you're doing, that the Republicans won Congress, the White House, and the Senate, right? If they believe in their agenda and what they're doing, they should be able to get up in front of people, defend it, and at least listen on, oh, I didn't realize that was going to happen. Well, maybe we can change it. Or maybe they're just not doing that. And it's interesting. You may hear people reference, well, Ronald Reagan did this. President Reagan, President Bill Clinton did this. Yes, they did. They had massive cuts in federal spending, but they went through an appropriate legal process. We have a three-part government. They went to Congress. They had conversations with the administrative branches. They had dialogue. They made proposals. They went back and forth. They did cut significant dollars from the federal budget. Now, Reagan turned it into a tax cut and ballooned the federal deficit, which we don't talk about, which we should. It's so interesting with what's going on in this country because the last time this country had a balanced federal budget, Democrat Bill Clinton was president of the United States. I don't think Kamala Harris mentioned that once during the campaign. It's those day-to-day issues that people care more about. I will never abandon my social justice values, but we sometimes forget what are people thinking about day in, day out, the price of eggs, what's going on in their daily lives. It doesn't mean we abandon the other things, but we have to kind of talk where people's relevancy is to what's going on.
Yeah, how are you going to pay for it?
So interesting. But anyway, so we'll see what happens. I think we'll know more in our next quarterly show about what are those real dollar impacts, what's really, and what are the choices we're going to have to make. I mean, we've got some money in the rainy day fund, but not enough to cover $15 billion, that's for sure. And we'll see what happens. But I'm hopeful that as more states see the impacts, there's conversation, not just in blue state, in every state. Like, well, listen, did you realize this was going to happen? I spent a lot of my career on international development. It's so sad to see the huge cuts in humanitarian aid. And that stuff is good for yes, it helps people in need. But it helps us make friends. It helps open up markets for American goods. It helps with our national defense. And by the way, most of it goes, the billions of dollars in food for peace goes to American farmers to support them. So it's not,
Yep.
we sometimes
And there's
think-
also the intelligence that is garnered from just having people on the ground.
Absolutely, absolutely.
know?
Just ongoing dialogue, what's happening here.
Yeah, it's just like being in a coffee shop. You get to overhear the conversation, and suddenly you're a part of the network.
It's an investment in building a global community. So in any event, we'll see how that plays. But it is a very challenging time, and we're not sure how it's all going to play out. And here's what's interesting too is there have been some attorney generals are going to court and they're blocking some of this because a lot of the money that's been cut was money that was appropriated by Congress, signed by the president. That's contract signed. They're losing that stuff in court. But I remind people, but in the next budget cycle, the president has an outsized role. That is his and perfectly legal. So either way, we're going to have to deal with some serious stuff. But hopefully there'll be at least some reasonable conversations about what we can do. I mean, the federal deficit is $1 trillion plus. I mean, it's unconscionable. So I'm glad they're looking at it. I just wish they were being a little more thoughtful the way they went about it.
The difference between a scalpel and a chainsaw.
Well, yeah.
And the thing is that they do control all three branches,
That's right.
so it's perfectly legal ways in which to accomplish the same end
for sure.
without causing this chaos and this uncertainty.
No, exactly.
Well, even business leaders are complaining about the uncertainty, the on-again, off-agains of things. And
people want to plan.
And that would be the same here. If the intent is to cut whatever, Commissioner Healy of the Department of Agriculture used to say that it was better to die with, one mortal stab than 1,000 slashes, whatever.
Right.
And he would always say to us, if you're going to say no to a community that they can't have a grant, please just make it a fast no.
Yeah.
Same thing here. Make it a fast no. If that's really what the hill you're going to die on.
Yeah. Tell us the parameters.
Tell us now
let us
so
know what we have to
just
deal with.
Get marching.
No.
But right now, everybody's on hold.
No, it changes every day, and that's frustrating for everyone. Too.
Well, and it's uncertain for everybody. It's uncertain not just as individuals with their own homes, but also the building industry, the hotel industry. This blather about the tariffs.
What tariffs are going to do to our farmers and builders and wood.
The people who do summer vacations are saying that there's a dramatic cut. People from Canada are canceling everything from up and down the coast.
Wow.
Always go to Florida and no way, not going.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with that. So let's move to any of the bills and what committees are you on?
Yeah, sure. So it's fascinating at the State House. I worked a lot with federal and
I love the words we've applied to it. Fascinating.
Well, because in Congress, you get on committees, you work your way up, and it's kind of this wholesale changing.
Yeah, hopscotch.
And I guess it's always been that way. And there's value in having a portfolio that extends in a lot of different areas. I see that. But I like some continuity. So I asked to be on agriculture again, and I am. I do have an active interest in public service. I care so much about whether it's first responders, town employees, veterans, people that have served in Peace Corps, people that have served in AmeriCorps. I mean, I don't think we do enough for that whole ilk. And so I'm on public service, and I'm looking forward to some of those dialogues and debates. I also, concomitant with that, I'm on veterans, which will be interesting given all the changes that we're hearing. And I've got some actually bills that we're working on too. I did get put on housing, which will be interesting. It's certainly a huge challenge still for Massachusetts. We did that big bond bill last year, but the reality is it took us years to get into this situation. It's going to take us years to get out of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully
Decades.
we can be more creative. But I've got a couple. I mean, there's one that I want to, it gets more to the issue around collaboration with other towns. So we'll save one. I want to make sure I have time for that. But there's a couple I'm very concerned about PFAS and how it's affecting our water, our food, our farmers, and I do have a bill that's going to help farmers. They've got to rehabilitate the soil. I mean, we don't, now Maine made a mistake. They went too fast, too soon, and they put a lot of farmers out of business. We don't want to do that. We want to protect our water and soil, but we also want to protect our farmers at the same time with funding to help them deal with it. One of the things that's going on now, people are afraid to test for PFAS because it's unclear whether they're going to be forced to spend thousands of dollars or is the government going to help. We got to get some, that's a bigger issue we need clarity on, but at least, that's something that'll help. And what I say all the time is, look, I'm all for a cleaner environment, being thoughtful about our food and water and things like that. But USDA used to say, and then there's the food that gets dropped at the docks. What's happening to that? Their prices are undercutting our farmers, and who knows how healthy it is, right? There's got to be some equity in the way we approach some of that
exactly.
stuff. That's one.
Exactly.
You know, I am concerned about, I'm trying to think which one I want to talk about because I wanted to say, now let me talk about the Veterans Bill. So, you know, a lot of towns have emergency funds for veterans, but vets have all kinds of challenges. It's not just, you know, food and sort of immediate needs. So we're looking to expand that. Maybe they have a legal issue. Maybe the housing is becoming bigger and bigger. And up until now, they haven't been able to use that money for that. So I think that's one of those little things that will help along the way. There's one that kind of jumps into the, excuse me. I just want to make sure I talk about it. It bridges, there's one that relates to ag and there's one that relates to what's going on in our town. So let me touch on the ag one because it gets to my food security issues. So the Greater Boston Food Bank and Project Bread have identified that we're in a time of rising food insecurity, sadly. Yet, at the same time, our SNAP caseload is down a little bit, which is kind of odd. And what we're finding is because the system is jammed up and people aren't getting on it soon enough. So I think we need to study it, we need to look at it. The irony with that is that to the extent that there's still a federal program, those are federal dollars. That's like leaving money on the table that can help people buy food, and it can also help our grocery stores and farmers and places like that. So I think we need to identify what the problems are with that program and how do we get more people on it to the extent that it's a federal program that's functioning. But I have one thing that I want to, it kind of bridges to your what's going on around the communities, but I've got a piece of legislation that's relevant that I'd like to share with you. So, Mayor, before I even was sworn in, I got several calls from school committees all over the district about the concern of the rising costs of sped ed. Now,
Special education.
Special education, right? We all use acronyms too much. Yes, special education. Now, I want to make sure that every child gets what they need. That's not what my debate is about. My debate is about who pays for it. And small towns are just getting squeezed in the way the government, Massachusetts state government approaches this. So I got calls because OSD, Operational Services Division of the state, told cities and towns that they were going to have to pay 14% more a year for out-of-district tuition, and then the next year was 5%, so almost 20% in just 2 years. And it's crushing small towns. They don't have units where they've got 25 sped ed teachers. Everyone's kind of maybe one or two, and they trade off. You were going to ask me a question?
Just to clarify, out-of-district placements, meaning a student that cannot get the services that he or she needs within the town,
yeah,
is then, and it might not be an institution that this person is placed in, but rather another school, right? It could be going to, in my granddaughter's case, Norfolk Aggie.
Yes.
That's an out-of-district placement.
Yes.
So the cost to do that.
Well, but I actually like that model because it's within the state system. It's the private school tuition that went up by 14% a year.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Is that the tuition?
Yeah, no. This is private school tuition, which we basically privatized sped ed in some instances, and unfortunately, this is what my legislation do. My legislation would say, OSD can raise the tuition by 2.5% that gets passed on to communities, right?
And the balance.
Why did I pick 2.5%?
Because we're stuck with it.
Because we're stuck with that. So by Prop 2.5, cities and towns cannot go to unless they go to the voters for an override, they can only raise their rates by 2.5%. So why can the state with impunity say, oh, you can pay a 14% increase? You can pay. That's just not fair. Now, I'm not challenging the wisdom of whether or not they need the increase. That's a separate issue. And I've said, look, we have this fair share amendment. The balance should be paid for by the state. I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying who bears the brunt of it. They've got layoffs in Millis. Millis had, because their budgets are so tightly squeezed at a small town. Related to all this, some parts of the state have special education consortiums where the towns work together. You know, we just had celebrations, Holliston's 250th, Sherburne 300th. Those lines were drawn 200 and 300 years ago, and we still act that way, like it takes all day to get across town. Why not more regionalization for some things? I don't know where this would go, but I'm willing to do an earmark. I'm talking to some of the sped ed leaders in different towns and say, look, we're not a city that has a staff of 25 sped teachers where every year you mix and match. We have a need here, we have a need there, we're going to send you to this school. Why don't we do that? Why don't we have centers of excellence or use more schools like the Aggie School, different schools that this need can be met by sending them here, by sending them there, keep it within the state system. There'd still have to be a formula and work out the mechanics and the money, but it would save communities significant amounts of money because it's getting more and more expensive to outsource and privatize it. California only sends 1% of their special ed students out of district. We send 5%. It's because we have so many really small communities that they can't meet the needs. So why aren't we collaborating more as a region? I'd like to see, I mean, it's up to towns. In Sherburne, they've gone to regional 911. So far, so good. I'm going to meet with them about some of those things that they're doing. But we have to look at ways that we can, and I know it's been done over time with different positions and spots, but I just think people are just getting squeezed on their taxes, and overrides are getting harder and harder to pass. So I think to the extent we can thoughtfully share resources, I think that's better for us.
So going back to the special education, it's my understanding that the lion's share of what the Department of Education provides to us at a national level is money for SPED. Where does that money fall into this?
How does it? Well, it flows to the cities. There is towns get reimbursed. There's the circuit breaker that was put into place. So you only pay so much in any given year. I think it's a 4-time multiplier. We're trying to make it 3-time multiplier. If you have to pay more than 4 times the average rate that you're paying your students, eventually you'll get some of that reimbursed above the circuit breaker amount. But then it comes the following year, and it's another complicating factor because it comes so late in the year. But I understand what you're asking. I'm not exactly sure, but my understanding is a huge amount of the education department money that comes from the federal government is in fact for special education, dealing with disabilities, dealing with some of
That's all it is.
Yeah. So if that's cut, where does that money come from? Right. That's going to be a bigger hit on the state budget, because I am almost sure, and we can confirm this coming next time. It doesn't flow directly to communities. It goes to the state.
I would assume so.
So
I would assume. I assume it would be the state. It's a line item that goes to the state for special education.
There's already debates about why we're not fully funding the transportation reimbursement for SPED Ed. Right on paper, there's a significant reimbursement that's put. It's like 75%, but it's been more like 35 to 40 because the state hasn't had enough money. Well, if we're going to lose another couple $100 million, what does that mean? It's just we're getting squeezed all around, and we're going to have to make some tough choices as a state. We cannot do everything. And I think that's going to have to be part of our conversation with
we can't do everything.
And communities,
and I think we all have to start thinking about it from that standpoint. We cannot do everything. And I think that's one of the largest complaints that people had about the whole Democratic approach this last election, was there was no talk about any of this cost. We just want to go out and help and help and help and help, and it's like, God, at some point
we have finite resources.
You have got to stop and recognize that you can't. There is a bottom.
And it is interesting that at the state, a town too, we have to balance our budgets.
I know.
We're required by law to do that. So why, I know there's been efforts to have a balanced budget amendment federally. I wouldn't be opposed to it as long as in an emergency you can do certain things. But yeah, so hopefully we'll get there. But yeah, it's a discipline that towns have to do and states do too. And it forces you to make some choices, hard choices sometimes. Because everybody wants their program that they believe in to be funded, myself included. And
I don't think that it's very often that we get faced with something that's a bad idea, because it's so easy to say no to a bad idea. The fact is, we get faced with a myriad of good ideas, and some are better than others, and some might affect more people than others, but every one of them takes some measurement.
That's right.
But right now, because of the indiscriminate cuts at a federal level with no rhyme or reason and no planning and so forth, I don't see how Massachusetts ends up being able to come close to doing its own budget.
No, that's right.
Or, God forbid, cities and towns. How are you going to know what you can afford to give for local aid unless you know what's,
That's right.
So,
we base our budget based on what to some extent, what's coming from the feds. Towns do the same thing. The cherry sheets. How do we plan? I mean, that's one of the complaints, that some of the things that have been put forward don't happen on special education. They find out in August that they have a huge increase. Well, that's not fair either. I mean, you got we have to be more thoughtful about the way we do it. And again, I'm not saying there's not a circumstance where that has to happen, but where's the state in supporting it?
I'm not sure. I mean, there are very few employees in the Department of Education. We don't have a national curriculum. We don't have the national standards of any, so primarily it's doing the administration on special education. And it seems to me if they absolutely do pull that plug and probably have to move some people to other departments, I don't care if they call it a Department of Education or call it whatever. The bottom line is that function is what you've got, we're looking at.
And the money attached
and the
to it.
money that goes with
That's
it.
right,
That's really all that matters.
I do think for the long term, we should be thinking about educating more sped ed teachers, because if it's a growing need, why aren't we meeting that need? It seems like it's
a tough field.
Yeah,
I actually have
to be in it. You mean
I
it on
have
the
a teacher, in it.
My
and
oldest
it's
teacher's
like,
autistic kid, so lots of challenges.
Lots of challenges, and it's not just the challenge of the pupil. I think that may be the easiest part of it. It's the expectations of parents. And then the expectations of the school. The school is trying to hang on to the purse strings as tightly as they possibly can.
Sure. Every student they lose is a cost.
The parent is trying to push for more. And who's in the middle? It's that teacher. The teacher and the kid, And you're pulling on people's heartstrings and purse strings at the same time. And it's a real tug of war. And I think that the teachers who are in it find it extremely stressful to have to make choices that are not life and death. The kid's not going to die because he doesn't get this, but his quality of life is going to change.
And they've got a variety of expertise, and there's a variety of needs. That goes back to if we had a consortium, maybe we'd be better at matching.
That's an interesting idea.
Maybe we'd be better at matching teachers to students' needs instead of somebody having to have their child, travel an hour and a half. Maybe it's just going to the town.
I do want to ask you one thing about these private schools. Now, name a school. What are you talking about? Can you think of one that's a private?
I off the top of my head, I don't want to give a wrong name. So
okay. I'm not even sure I understand what schools these are, because the ones that I know.
I think the Carroll School is one of them.
Like this Carroll School for the Blind.
Yeah, but they do other things beside that. That's just an example.
Or the School for Deaf, or that kind of thing.
Yeah. But then there's also just schools that have sprung up that take special ed kids and they
Okay.
And it's expensive.
I
mean, I want every child to get what they need, but we've privatized it so much, it's costing us a lot more money. And there's got to be a smarter way to do it. I'm not sure what it is. But there's got to be a smarter way to do it.
I also think to some degree that sending a child out of town, or trying to get them out of some university he can have some familiarity with, that's going to be hard. If you've got special needs and you're think an autistic kid with language issues or something, and now you're put on a bus to go an hour and a half to wherever.
Most parents that not all, but most parents that I've talked to, and I include myself as one when my kids were younger, I always wanted, as best we could, to have the kids not to be close by if they
neighborhood
can.
Schools.
Neighborhood schools, if it can work, or community next door, a couple communities over. Much better. So lots of challenges ahead. But we will know more next time about where we are with the budget. So,
is there anything that we as constituents can do in helping either addressing things to you or to at a state level? At the federal level, we're all running around trying to figure out what to do.
It always helps to hear about impacts, because it just helps us understand better what's going on in people's lives, especially if we're going to get to the point where the state can only do so much. I mean, the more we hear from constituents about programs that are ending, because we hear the big numbers, but then what does that mean at a local level, at a community level, for things that are going to be cut? I mean, it's I don't know if we can replace it, but I guess $2 billion in NIH grants go to Massachusetts. I mean, that's an industry in Massachusetts. I mean, we're going to lose.
It's the Institute of Health.
I mean, and never mind our what it's going to do
economy.
For long-term research in health issues, but it's a huge part of the Massachusetts economy, and so that's troubling of in itself. And what does that mean? Layoffs? Do we lose talent? Do we lose good people?
Of course you do.
Yeah, so it's going to be quite the and laid over this, notwithstanding what's going on federally, we as a state still have challenges with affordability. It's so expensive to live here. And, I'm really looking forward to being on housing. We'll see what we can do. We've got to figure out some things, and it's going to take time. We're not going to be able to do it all.
Well,
at once.
and you talk about housing, and while you're trying to put your finger in the dike over here, a tariff on lumber or
sure.
a tariff on steel.
All of a
or
sudden, you
is-
just jacked up the
now
prices for
this
building.
Finger, now you're going to,
How about school costs? In Tri-Valley, they're building a new school, and they've actually had to put part of it on hold because they're like, oh my God, if this
the
goes
price-
through, we're not going to have the money to finish the project.
No,
So
when you start jacking things by 25%, you're really talking
the
big
president's
numbers.
he's backed off on a few things, but
Yeah,
we'll see.
we'll have to wait and see.
No,
I
exactly.
am going to put an underscore for people to contact your office, to
Sure.
send information to your
Absolutely.
office. You don't have to be asking for something.
Yeah.
It's just a point of information. Let him know. I used to be a constituent worker, so it's like, let us know.
No.
But let people in the State House know what's happening at a ground level, because they really can't know it all unless you tell them.
That's right.
So send in,
For
call.
sure.
How do you take your information?
Email is best because then we have a documentation.
Yep.
People can
Okay.
call if it's better, but the best is the email. And I try, if it's a constituent in the district, I try to answer personally. We read everything, but sometimes we get stuff from all over the state, all over the country.
Sure.
But we do the best we can. And I depending when this airs, we'll put a blurb out to HCAT on upcoming office hours that we're having in Holliston. Plus
How
a
often do you
virtual
do
one.
those?
I try to do them a couple times a year, but
Yep.
what I say to people is if the time doesn't work for them, call Jeff Myers. He's our
Yep.
LA. He's wonderful. And we'll find a time where I can sit down. I sit down a lot, and it'll be 15 minutes, half an hour. As best I can, I try to do that just to hear what's on people's minds and things they care about. So.
Well, it's the only way that you get information.
No,
So
that's right.
to that
Absolutely.
extent, it's on us as constituents to keep our legislators informed, and that doesn't mean we're crying and whining and everything. It's just, you need to know this.
Oh, it's good situational awareness. It's always helpful. So.
All right, well, James, once again, thank you so much. We'll see you in 3 months. By then, we should have more stable numbers, let's hope. If we don't, then we're all in deep yogurt, very deep yogurt. But anyway, with that said, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.